Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bright Funders Talk at Temy. Temy is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. Welcome to our podcast, where we bring you the most inspiring stories of entrepreneurs and experts in the software development industry. And each week, we interview successful leaders who share their unique journeys and valuable insights. I'm your host, Barry, and today we're lucky enough to be joined by an amazing guest, Peter Shafton, who is CTO at ngrok. Hello, Peter. Welcome to the podcast. How's your day going?
So far, so good. I have my tea with me. I'm, ready to go, and a lot of plants behind me, as you can probably all see.
Yeah, very green focused. We love it. Just for those who don't know you, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the company that you work at?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, my name is Peter Shafton. I am the CTO at ngrok. Those who haven't heard of ngrok, I'll talk a bit about what it is. And my journey here, although technically started roughly 2.5 years ago, first really started almost a decade ago. The founder of the company, Alan Shreve, was an engineer with me back in 2011 at a company called Twilio. And at Twilio, those folks know, did telephony, phone calls, SMS messages, and was built on top of something called webhooks, which basically meant you had to receive a callback to be able to process telephone calls or messages. And one of the challenges we had at Twilio was that we didn't have a way to test what we were building. Basically, everything you wanted to do, you had to push to production. You basically had to put it live so that somebody could receive the webhooks. And from that, there was a product called Local Tunnel that was built. And ngrok is a derivation of Local Tunnel. So Alan really built it first when we were at Twilio to solve our problem internally. And it became the company that it is today, and where I first met Alan and first joined. And so he left Twilio in 2013, continue on this journey, created the startup as a bootstrapped company. And then I stayed at Twilio for another 10 odd years and joined him here at ngrok. So that's sort of how I got started into this and how I ended up here as the CTO.
Were you always interested in those kind of things? Was it something that you had from when you were your student days? Was it something that you just acquired along the way?
It's a good question. Yeah. So my background, ironically enough, I'm a naval architect by trade. So not that many shipbuilders in the software industry, but it's a much faster iteration. A ship takes you like 2.5 years to build or think about in a software. Like by the end of the day, your code is live. And so I ended up in the software industry, ironically, through a few companies. Some of exist anymore, SGI and others, and really started my career in video and video systems and video analytics. Some work for the government and others. And after a decade or more of doing video work, I ended up into networking because video was the most important part of networking. And that led me eventually to Twilio, which ironically enough, they let me on board anyway, even though I was a video guy, and they were doing telephony, which I had never done before. And so my love really was of how do you connect things together, right? Like, how do you send packets from one place to another? How do you do it quickly? How does that apply to phone calls? How does that apply to video calls, live streaming kinds of things? And so the ngrok journey is very much around how do you make it really efficient to process and manage video infrastructures, which or network infrastructures, which, for most companies is really complicated. So yeah, I love the space.
So you mentioned the ngrok journey. Can you just tell us a little bit about ngrok's journey, actually?
Yeah, so it's fun. It started, as I mentioned, as almost like a testing tool. If people had software on their local laptop and they wanted to test it out, or they wanted to share it with a friend or their boss or a customer who had to validate it beforehand, what they would generally have to do is deploy it to production somewhere, push it to Amazon, get a domain name, get a website, push it live. And what ngrok enabled you to do is basically have a little agent, a little sidecar, as you will, the ngrok executable, sitting on your local machine, and it would proxy out to the internet. So it proxies out to a cloud environment that the ngrok company, us, run and operate, and we became the front door to your website. So we would give you a domain name. You could provide your own, or we could generate one randomly. And if you hit that URL, we would proxy the traffic, what they call a reverse proxy, into your box. That meant you didn't have to do the kinds of things that we probably do at home, which was punch a hole through your firewall, set up a DNS, some way to basically, have a direct connection through. And so that was where ngrok started, very much as a tool for developers and by developers. And, there are more than 10 million accounts on the platform and more than 450,000 people a month, active accounts using it. Many are still using it for that use case, which came up more than a decade ago. What Alan found, and I learned as I sort of went along the journey with him, was Turns out that combination of being able to proxy things that way solved a whole bunch of other interesting problems. One of them you can think about is, hey, you have a device out in the world. We found some of these devices are speedboats or remote control planes or smart mirrors that don't normally have an internet presence, don't normally connect, can reverse proxy out through a cellular modem or anything else, and then be accessible from the internet. And so that first step of hey, what are the things you can do, enabled a whole bunch of other use cases to appear. And you think about examples, I'll give you a good one, is Dunkin Donuts. So Dunkin does all their mobile ordering over ngrok effectively, right? They didn't want to put their 22,000 some odd store locations on the internet per se, right? Like nobody wants to open up a firewall to their cash registers and their POS systems. And so they use ngrok to proxy that traffic. And so they can take mobile's orders in, deliver them to any of the store locations all through that platform. And it turns out if you can send the traffic through like that, we are effectively in the line of that traffic. And when that happens, we can do all the things that you would have to do as a software developer otherwise. And I saw this at Twilio early on too. You set up a website, you're like, great, I'm online, my company is getting traffic, I'm really excited. And then you realize, oh gosh, one of my customers is sending a lot more traffic than the rest, and they're using up all my bandwidth and all my capacity. So I have to rate limit them somehow. And so all of a sudden, as a software developer, you find yourself building rate limiting into your platform, or you say, gosh, I need to do authentication. Some customers I'm going to allow in, some I'm not. I have to build an identity-aware authentication mechanism, or I should really be logging all of these requests, or I need to block certain requests based off the country of origin or other things about them. And so as software developers that put things online, we find ourselves having to build all of these pieces ourselves. And we realized we could do all of that automatically for you at ngrok, right? Because we were in that path and in that line. And it meant you didn't have to go through the normal flow that most people do, right? Usually it's this approval through IT, security team gets involved, you ask for domain names, you manage certificates, all those pieces. And that really became the ngrok journey, right? It exploded in the way because people found it themselves and started using it. Ironically, the Dunkin use case was an IT engineer at Dunkin who just installed it on one of his point of sale systems, validated it worked, and then sent an email to Alan and said, hey, I just did this thing. Is that okay? And Alan sort of scratched his head for a minute and said, I hadn't thought about that use case, but totally works. Sure, why not? And so that's sort of the fun part of the journey, right? Watching how people use the platform, what problems they go to solve with it.
I was going to ask you a question. I think you've answered it there really. Have there been any really interesting ways in which the application or ngrok has been used in the way that you didn't expect it to be used? And I think you probably answered that, but
yeah, some of them are interesting. So we've seen sort of 4 different uses. One was the traditional one we always saw, which was the developer choice up. The use case inbound to devices was interesting. The other one is site to site. Customers who basically said, I've got a product, but my product requires access to my customer's data that lives somewhere else. So that was sort of a fun one. If you think about Databricks, as an example, they need to process the data that lives in your data center. And you don't want to, again, put your database on the internet directly, was an interesting one. The fun ones that we saw were people managing robots. So in some of the places, there are companies where you can rent a robot and it will do some operation for you in your factory. And so they need to be able to remotely access those roads, but they're often behind 2 or 3 levels of firewalls. Certainly the smart mirrors was a fun one. There's a company that builds these mirrors for parties, and you go and you stand in front of it, it takes a picture for you. So they just show up someplace, they have a cellular connection in the mirror, you dress up in funny outfits and it takes pictures and controls it. So those have been fun ones. There's a bunch of modems. There's a company called Piso Wi-Fi all over the Philippines and those areas who basically put smart Wi-Fi connections in coffee shops. And so they manage all of the connections. People come in, they pay 25 cents. They get, a couple hours worth of Wi-Fi or whatever it is. So those are some of the fun stuff we see that just sort of shows up on the platform. And because it's a product-led business, it's not like you come and you contact us, just like Twilio. In some sense, you put in a credit card, you start using the product, you pay for it, your business grows or whatever. And we kind of find out either because you reached out to support and said, hey, I have an issue, or I want to do something that I can't do yet, but it just grows organically. So those are some of the fun stuff I've seen. But I've also seen people controlling remote RC planes, which I thought was pretty funny.
Have you ever seen things and you thought kind of like, oh, I'm not sure if that's the way that I would like it to be used in, or do you embrace everything?
No, that is a really good question. And one of the big challenges that both we face and people who put anything on the internet face, which is fraud and abuse, right? Like a reverse proxy is a really interesting technology, right? It enables you to basically connect things to the internet. We give you a domain name you can use, but it also means you can have a website up for minutes and then have it disappear, right? And you think about, what are the use cases that people would want to do that are great? And then you think of the use case. What are the people who want to do that's not great, right? Like imagine people use it for phishing, right? You put up a fake version of a Facebook page and you convince somebody that it looks like Facebook and they put in their Facebook credentials and you capture it, right? And so we've had to combat that kind of thing. There's a lot of ways we do internally of adding interstitials and things that basically show you this is being served by ngrok. This is not really Facebook or Bank of America or whoever you're pretending to be. And we have the ability to capture images and shut those down. We have an internal abuse system, but that for sure is a problem that we face. There's also traffic that can be used, in malicious ways. People can, surreptitiously install things on machines and then proxy the traffic out, right? And you're not aware that this is happening. And so we work with the CERT teams at Google and Amazon and under certain countries as well, Ukraine and others, to combat this stuff, to find them and shut them down. A lot of those partners have direct access to be able to shut them down programmatically when they see it, because often the partnership between two of us, they can operate faster than we can. But that's an ongoing fight. In a sense, it's funny because I had a similar experience at Twilio when we said, here's this platform for sending SMS messages and making phone calls, which is awesome. Like if you're Uber and you want to tell somebody your car's out front, send them a text message is great. But if it turns out you want to fake a two-factor authentication message or make a fraudulent phone call or a phishing phone call of some sort, great platform for that too, right? And so how do you build something that is a technology stack? It's a platform that enables all these great uses and fight the people that are on it doing the stuff you don't want them to do. And that is, an ongoing challenge. But it's interesting. It's a problem not only for us, it's a problem for our customers, right? Like they're having people that are doing fake account signups, right? Stolen credit cards, prepaid. So those are all things that over time we see the platform not only protecting ourselves, but the people on top of the platform being able to leverage that same tech stack to protect themselves from that.
Yeah, it's a fight that's going to be ongoing, and I don't think we're ever going to see an end to it. It's kind of like the arms race, isn't it? The more advanced you become, and the more advanced that they become, and then you have to become more advanced. So, and like you said, it's not specific to you. I think it's all areas, all firms that have any technology.
Yeah, it's the cat and mouse story for sure. And there was an old joke about the boy's out with his father in the forest walking, and he puts on his tennis shoes and he says, Dad's like, why are you putting on tennis shoes? It's like, so I can outrun the bear. He said, you're not going to be able to outrun a bear. He said, I don't have to outrun the bear. I have to outrun you, Dad. Right. So the key is you're never probably going to be completely free of abuse. You're just going to be better than things around you, and hopefully protect yourself. Obviously, I would love to raise, the whole ecosystem and everybody that's doing this. But I think it comes from understanding how it happens and how do you stop it first.
We've been talking about very interesting things in terms of things that you've been doing previously, things you've seen, experienced. But
Yep.
like, what are the tech trends that are currently catching your attention within the industry? And like, what are the driving factors behind their significance?
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, obviously ML and AI has been this story forever, right? And I had a team at Twilio that did that work as well. And I'm less interested in the generative usage of AI and more interested in the uses around how to use it to combat some of these things. Fraud, abuse, right? How do you combat some of the signals? So that's certainly a trend that I'm watching and leaning on in many ways. The other ones that are really interesting is the ownership of data. There was this push over time, to sort of move all your data to the cloud, right? Like the cloud vendors obviously wanted us doing, there's Bigtable and BigQuery in Google, and Amazon has, Athena and S3 used for this stuff. And obviously there's companies like Snowflake and others. So there's this push incentive to get your data out there so that it can be used and shared. And what we've seen over time is all of a sudden there's this concept like, well, wait a second, like the data actually is the value of my company and what I do. And I'm not sure I actually want it all out in the world or all internet accessible or all. And so what we're seeing is a push almost back to to data ownership and data residency, not only like within your country, but within your own walls of your business. And so that's made it challenging for the companies whose business actually is connected to data, right? For the companies that are doing ML and building models on top of your data, they need access to your data, right? So how do you control governance, right? Like you want to be GDPR and CCPA compliant. You want to control the life cycle of your data. That all happens more by you having control of where your data goes, right? It's much harder once you sort of sent it out in the world to delete it if a customer asks you to delete it, or to know, who got to it, when and where. So that's a trend I've seen. And in some ways leans into what we're doing as well, because ngrok enables a mechanism to proxy that. And we are effectively a zero trust platform. So the data doesn't sit in our platform, it goes through and is encrypted throughout. So it not only is it interesting for me just to see, because I spent a bunch of time doing compliance and actually drove GDPR at Twilio along with a few other very, very useful people, but it's applicable to what we're doing now.
So if we step away from your experience just for a moment and concentrate more on like ngrok, and what is like the primary focal points or any like ongoing projects or endeavors that are taking place that you can talk about at the moment?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of fun stuff around, ngrok has always been API first. So like sort of some of the API gateways and universal gateways, if you think about that, were driven programmatically. And you'll see some of the newer stuff we've done, we call it a traffic policy. But basically the idea is that you can control the behavior of traffic that transits the network using cell expressions. So defining functions and language that says, hey, when this request comes in, obviously I can look at HTTP headers and I can look at the content of the body. I can run my own functions, conceivably using WASM code and manipulate the processing, right? I can choose how I load balance. I can choose which backend origin servers the traffic goes to. I can respond to customers. In some ways, you may not need to have an origin server at all. Like you could literally handle a lot of the traffic and requests that come through as payloads by code that lives in the cloud, right? And that's similar to the concept of like Lambdas and what you would do in AWS, but in a cloud agnostic way, right? And so that's a lot of what we're dealing with and working on. We've got our traffic policy stuff. Now, the other thing we're working on that will be live shortly is private endpoints, right? There's this concept of putting something on the internet, which is what ngrok sort of always did, right? It's like, hey, I've got this thing, I want it to be available. Once you put it on the internet, now the question is, well, how do I protect it, right? Like I put it out there, which is great, but I don't actually want everybody to see it. And there's concepts like mutual TLS. You can provide certificates, you can have authentication, but really what they wanted is they didn't want it publicly available. They wanted sort of privately available, right? Like I need to be able to access it, but I only want to access it from here or by customer or another site. And so those kinds of technologies we're building internally right now, which basically ends up with private endpoints. So you can imagine you have an endpoint that would normally be on the internet, but it just shows up inside a Kubernetes cluster, right? And it would show up as a service. We handle the authentication. We handle the management of certificates that guarantee that traffic is secure. And you can just access it, and only you. But you would also have the ability to share it. So you could say, hey, listen, this is an endpoint. I want this customer or partner to be able to see it, and this other one, and I'm going to be able to access it here, but it isn't universally. It wouldn't resolve as a DNS name on the internet, and you would have observability to it and control over it. So I think those are some of the things we're working on right now, which are really interesting. And we'll also be demoing something at KubeCon, so folks have a chance to see some of this and play with it there.
So they all sound like really interesting projects, and I'm sure there are people watching this right now, I think, and that's something that I'd like to be involved in. So for anyone who is watching this who might want to be able to reach out to the company, how do they do that?
Yes, the easiest is www.ngrok.com. That's the easiest way to find us, but you can also go, we have open jobs, so folks that are interested in technology, love the space, love networking, please look. I am hiring for folks and always love people that are interested in technology and helping developers. We also are on Slack and YouTube. So if you look for us there, and you can reach out to me, Peter at ngrok, if you really want to start up a conversation.
Perfect. And this environment is fast changing. It never stops. How do you keep up to date? How do you, with the change that's constant and ongoing? How do you do that?
I wish I could say I can do it really, really well. I can't say that. The short answer is you have smart people around you, right? Like the reality is I alone know a fraction of stuff, right? And even the stuff I've learned historically, but I find that people have different areas of interest and different areas of focus. And engineers often love to dig into things. And so I'll spend time with the engineers and they will have ideas of stuff they've run into see, and we can talk through that stuff. And we do that internally as groups. We have tech talks and things. But that is a great way to find, because I find people are in spaces like Nix and, and Protobuf and the Go ecosystems and other things that I may not have as much time to chase down. And even, what are other people doing in the space? What are other people doing in the world? I've got an engineer here. He writes some of the blog posts you'll see, but he owns our data infrastructure. And he is driving that in a way I never thought about, right? The data space has moved so quickly compared to some of these other things when you see like DBT and Dagster and the technologies used to process data at scale. That's another fun way to do it.
So you mentioned some of the people who have helped you get you where you are today, and also the other people within your company. Like, what qualities do you look for, like in people who are hiring, for example, or people that you want to work with? What is it that you want to see in them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, for me, I almost distilled it down to one thing: intellectual curiosity. Right? I'm looking for people that are curious how things work, how the world works, right? You often see these people as you grow up who they're the kid that took apart their dishwasher at home and drove their mom nuts, but they wanted to know how things work. Because I think those are the people that, while they may not have the exact technology alignment of what you're doing today, they'll be curious, they'll dig in, and they'll drive, right? And they ask themselves why. So that's the first thing I look for sure. Obviously past experiences that show that you kind of grown. There's a funny thing I do in interviews sometimes is I'll ask people not only about what's on their resume, but often what I know are the things around them at work, right? Like if you worked on the ETL processing pipeline, do you know what happened after that, right? Like where did the data go? What did that, even if it wasn't your job, like did you actually understand? Because I find that curious people know a lot more about the company around them and the tech stack than their job probably aligned to. Whereas I think people that are less curious will tend to just sort of stay the path of like, well, my job was to do this. So that's fundamentally what I look for when I'm interviewing.
That's a great question, actually, because I never thought of it like that. That's something that I hope that no one ever asks me when I go for a job interview. But now you've thrown that out there, I think I'll need to start preparing for those eventual questions. So thank you for helping me with that. So you've had quite a wide and varied journey. In your experience, what is the best advice you could give to someone who maybe is wanting to be an entrepreneur or wanting to develop as a person? What is the best thing that they can do?
I think, there's two parts you say, and maybe I didn't always follow this journey myself. I think it's, follow your passion, right? As a founder, as an entrepreneur, you're going to have an idea about stuff that not everybody will believe in. And I think you're the one that has to sort of have the passion and drive that through. And I think the second is once you start putting things out in the world, listen to the feedback, listen to customers, right? It's easy to have that initial vision and thought and believe in it so profoundly that once you get signals that tell you that's not right, that you often don't pivot and shift. And when you see the people that are best at that, that is what makes a great entrepreneur. I think there's a guy named Stuart Butterfield who started Flickr. And ironically enough, Flickr was a game company before it became a photo sharing site. And he went on to start a company we all know and love, which is Slack. Again, didn't start as a messaging platform, started as a game company again, because that's what he believed in, but he pivoted, right? And I think that is an amazing skill as well, right? Like seeing what's happening and being able to pivot for sure.
And one more final question. I think I can sneak in just one more before our time comes to an end. The importance of networking, was it something that was beneficial to you? And if it was it as beneficial then as it is now?
Absolutely, right. And I think it's hard to put a price on your social capital in some sense, right? Like I think over the course of your career, leaning on people and building relationships with others helps, right? It helped me certainly to be able to recruit people into ngrok, like people I've loved and worked with before, convince them to take a leap of faith and a journey with me, right? Which otherwise they might, second guess, I think is one thing. And it also certainly helps you understand what's out there, right? I think as an entrepreneur, as a leader, part of what you're looking for is what else is going on. And it's really hard to do if you don't have a network of people that can tell you and that communicate and that will willing to share with you what they're seeing and doing. So networking, there's a part of engineering that is physical, that's typing and writing and thinking, and there's a whole part of it that's social, which is funny. And actually, ironically, one of the bigger challenges with starting a startup, right? Like it's, how does the team gel? How do the engineers get along with each other and communicate is as important as can these people write code or not.
Amazing answer, Peter. Thank you so much for taking time out to speak with us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Barry. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate you having me on and being willing to listen to me for this long.
It was a pleasure, I assure you. That was Peter Shafton, CTO at ngrok.